Like I said, it's the trade-off. It's like everything that you do has the intended consequence, and then there are secondary consequences associated with that. So it's not just one thing. You say, well, my intention is to increase their force. Okay, what are you going to give up to do that? And up to a threshold, like I want an athlete to produce as much force as they possibly need to perform. But there's going to be a threshold where the give and take starts to show up, and that's what we have to monitor over time. And that's why we need data points. So we collect data, right? We don't just look at the weight room numbers. We have to say, okay, but what is this doing to the rest of the system, and then how that system behaves. If I start to give up something, that could be a good thing because it increases my force production in a context, right? If I don't need like a full excursion of a joint to perform, but I do need high force, great, keep doing that. But if I start to lose something that's important, now we have health issues, and then we have performance issues.
Hey everybody, I'm your host, Anthony Rena. Welcome to episode 416 of the Strength Coach Podcast. We're talking about relevant topics with top coaches in the fitness industry to help you become a better coach, trainer, therapist, and business owner. All right, we are brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. The summits are over, but that doesn't mean the education is stopping at the Perform Better Functional Training Institute. So they actually have a place in Rhode Island at Perform Better with a gym and a lecture room, and they do a bunch of education there all year round. So they got a speaker school coming up, they got a movement workshop and a business workshop. So all in Rhode Island at the Perform Better Functional Training Institute. Guys, check it out at performbetter.com. All right, today I have on Bill Hartman. He is the co-owner of Indianapolis Fitness and Sport Training and iFast Physical Therapy. He's the constructor of the Unified Health and Performance Continuum model, and that's what we're really going to talk about today. It's going to sound like a mouthful. We're going to talk about the benefits of the helical structure and the influence of foundational structure on movement and performance. We're going to also talk about associated exercise selection and the consequences of those selections. Now, again, it sounds like a mouthful, but when you understand it, first of all, they have a free resource to kind of give you a little bit more background to go deeper. We have links for that on the show notes. But for a portion of the interview, Bill's going to share his screen and show some slides to kind of help illustrate the model he's talking about. Great stuff coming up from Bill. Also, as you know, we started a new segment a couple episodes ago in conjunction with the Business for Unicorns, Mark Fisher, Michael Keeler, Pete Dupuy, and Ben Picard. And it's called the Business for Unicorns Fitness Business Power Play. We don't have them on today. We're doing every other episode with them, but check out businessforunicorns.com. They have a ton of free resources, and you don't have to just own a business, own a actual facility to get to take advantage of those resources. But we do have on the Sumit Seth's coming back on the Naamly Maximizing the Member Experience segment today. And Sumit is going to discuss vitamins versus painkillers. This is a really good one. And it's why you want your brand and message to be a painkiller, not a vitamin. So great one coming up from Sumit. So check it out.
Hi, friends. Welcome to Naamly's Maximizing the Member Experience segment with your host, Sumit Seth, the co-founder of Naamly. Today, I'm going to share a very valuable business lesson that I learned from a long-term friend and a mentor of mine. It's something to do with these two bottles here. One is a vitamin. It's a supplement, and it supports and it gives you a boost. And the other is a painkiller. Let that land for a second. Vitamins are nice. They give you a boost. They help if you take them regularly. But painkillers? Now that's when someone's in a pain, they go out and it solves for a real problem, real time, and it gives you relief now. And this business mentor told me, I need to move from being a vitamin to a painkiller. And I think that's applicable to all of us in the fitness business as well. So think about your messaging. Are you offering a vitamin, a supplement, or are you really solving for a real problem and you come across as a painkiller? think about your messaging for a second there. People come to gyms and they say, if you're selling Get More Energy, that's a supplement. However, if you were to go back and say, I can help you be with your kids and I can help you feel energized throughout the day and you're not going to get winded up, now that's solving and being a painkiller. Similarly, if someone comes and says, oh, we help you tone your muscle, well, that's a vitamin, that's a supplement. On the same time, if you can tell them, well, that's going to help you to be able to lift your carry-on bag and put it on an overhead compartment, well, now people can connect to that and say, that's painful. Yes, you're solving a pain. And that's what you want to be able to do. Move that, transform yourself from being a supplement to a painkiller. Think about it not only from a marketing or a messaging perspective, but it's also on the offer and a sales process perspective. If you're coming over and saying, oh, we offer you 24/7 gym access, we do semi-private training, we do personal training, we do this. These are all different models, and you're just laying on options after options after options, and you're going to drive away the client. What you want to do is you want to be like that magnet that attracts things, but a magnet also has another property which we don't think about, which is repel. You want to repel the naysayers. And that's how you build a very strong community. You become that magnet by really solving for that essential pain point. And that's when you become the gym in your neighborhood. So let me be real with you. I had the same issue, like I shared, the one that my mentor told me about. When we started out, we were selling in our mind, being the painkiller, we were solving for the problem of retention. And we, till this day, are the best retention platform out there. However, when we would speak with the gym owners, outside of the 1% who were really looking for that edge, which is not too many, and the same thing applies in your markets as well, the mainstream people are all looking to get unstuck, to just get by, to solve for their immediate relief. That's what we realized when they would look at our platform and they would say, it's amazing. I'm going to think about adding on to that. Add is a really bad word in the software space because now it got us to think if we're going to be an adding thing, that means we're a vitamin. How do we become a painkiller? And that's when we started changing our messaging. And that's when we started also adding capabilities that would really make us become your gym operating system. So now we do billing, we do scheduling, we have integrated core systems, and of course we have retention, but we're no longer talking about only selling retention. We package it all together and say we're your one-stop shop. If you take anything away from today's segment, take this. Make the jump from being a supplement, a vitamin, to being a painkiller. Most people don't buy improvement. They don't buy that edge. What they buy is hope. They buy answers. They buy immediate relief. So think about your marketing, your messaging, your offer, your sales, your product, and stop being an optional service. Become the thing that clients can't live without. Become the thing that really solves for their immediate pain point and gives them the relief. Hell, the best thing would be you solve for something that they didn't even know they wanted. It's like going back to Henry Ford's classical thing that if I just gave people what they wanted, I would be giving them more horses, not a car. So give them something that they didn't even know they wanted is the ultimate thing that you can choose and shoot for. All right then, thank you once again for hanging out with me, Sumit Seth, co-founder of Naamly. Till next time, adios.
All right, guys, I am here with Bill Hartman. Bill Hartman is a physical therapist and strength coach. Been doing this for 34 years, co-owner of Indianapolis Fitness and Sport Training and the iFast Physical Therapy. He's the constructor of the Unified Health and Performance Continuum model, and we're going to talk about a lot about that today. I first really got exposed to Bill on strengthcoach.com, where he was a very frequent contributor. And I think, and you're going to see this today, Bill has a great way of, contrarian is not the word for Bill. He's just like a scientist and, you know, he's able to argue without, or state his point without a lot of emotion involve, and he's able to switch, and that's where I was starting to look on his website. We're gonna have links to his unified health and performance continuum model, and we're going to talk about that today, but just kind of start to understand where this comes from, and it's really interesting. So Bill, thanks for doing this, bud.
Thanks for having me. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it has. I know we live right down the street from each other too, so it's a little weird, but so all right. So at first too, I gotta say, like, and I kind of told you this a little earlier, when I saw some of your stuff on social media, sometimes I was like, ooh, it's that, where's that coming from? Or, because you were answering questions to people within really in your network. I was watching some of the videos, the Model 101 course at UHP Network, and starting to really like, oh yeah, like things were kind of put in order, and you took some of those clips, and I highly recommend everybody, like, you're going to hear some stuff today and it might be like, whoa, where are we going with that? But there's other resources that Bill has for this, for sure.
That's why we did it. Why we did it, because if you're exposed to this sequentially, then it starts to make a lot more sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of it is like, oh yeah, I'm doing that. Or yeah, I understand that. He's just saying, like, look at this or look at that, or look at it this way, or be a little bit more open-minded. So,
well, hey, can I interrupt you for just a sec?
Yeah,
it's like the point of this is not to change what you do.
Yes.
Right. The point of it is to increase your reasoning power to make better decisions so that you have coherence in your programs. Because what we tend to do is, if we don't have a strong enough reasoning power, we actually create our own interference, and it's not intentional. It's just we're using whatever model that we do have. Everybody has one, whether you understand that you do or not. Everybody already has something that they're using to make decisions. What our goal is to say, hey, this is a consideration, this is a consideration, this is a consideration. And the more that we understand about how the system behaves, and we're talking about people, right? The more that we understand about how we behave, we can actually make better decisions and get out of our own way, and then ultimately produce a better outcome, simply by eliminating things that are actually holding you back in your programming structure.
Yeah, and I think I told you earlier too, I love the way one of the first things you have your students do is write your model out. And it's such an important exercise. I started to think about it when I was reading or watching some of your stuff, and I thought, yeah, this is because it's the awareness piece that we need to kind of gain about ourselves to make those better decisions. It's funny, Bill, right beforehand, I was cruising on Facebook, and there was an article about Pavel and the kettlebells. And so I wanted to go to the comments because I knew there was going to be some crazy comments. And some people were like, oh, this changed my life. And other people were like, kettlebells are stupid, weights are better. And to your point, exactly what you're talking about, right?
No, it's like we have this massive toolbox, right? So you think about, my foundation is as a physical therapist. And in school, you're provided with all these tools, and then there's no rational application. It's like, here's a bunch of tools. And then it's like, well, when do I use this one? And they'll go, well, and it's very vague, and it doesn't give you a lot of reasoning. And so what we want to do is we want to expand our understanding, so we can draw on different elements and say, oh, now I see where this manual technique comes into play, or it comes into this exercise, or better yet, why I wouldn't want to use this activity at this time. There's nothing bad, there's nothing good. It's just a matter of, like, when would it be better for me to do this versus something else? And so if you don't recognize what you're using for reasoning, right, or you lack a depth that is accessible, then you're missing out on an opportunity to improve everything about what you do, from what cues do I use to drive a certain type of behavior, what tool would be a better option in this circumstance, versus just chasing a number or something in the gym and saying, oh, the number got better, or whatever that perception is. And so therefore I am successful, because what we're looking for in most circumstances is not chasing that number. We're saying, what does this number represent as far as producing the desired outcome? And that's why, and you said the perfect word. It's an awareness of what you do and why you're doing it. And if we can improve your why, then the how sort of reveals itself, and we make better decisions on a more consistent basis, and therefore our outcomes definitely improve.
Bill, I want to take a step back. I wasn't planning on going this way, but this made me think of where this came from. A lot of times I was thinking, wait, why did Bill, why did he set this up? And, you know, we always set up a product, a good products solve a problem. And I heard you talking about, you basically wanted to rip it all apart and start from the ground. Can you just,
before? It was horrible. It was horrible.
So did you feel like, hey, I'm getting stuck in this way, and like I need to rip this up and start to be better? So I don't want people to think like, hey, Bill was sitting on his high horse over here thinking, hey, you're doing it this way. No, Bill, this is something you went through and said, I need to fix what I'm doing.
Yeah, and this is all based on what makes sense to me, and then what works for me. And if it's valuable to someone else, by all means, you know, hop on the bandwagon and learn this to whatever extent that you want. Because I just want it to be useful. That's the goal. The goal is to be useful, but it's born out of frustration, right? One of my favorite quotes in the whole wide world is a guy by the name of Jerry Meadows said that if necessity is the mother of invention, then frustration is the father of progress. And what it was hitting the wall so many times and experiencing these failures, and then it starts to say, well, okay, I need to really self-examine this, and I need to kind of decide. It's like basically the reason that I ask other people to like write out what you do and why you do it. It's like, that's literally what I did. And it turns out that you got to strip away everything and you kind of start from scratch. And so that's where, you know, you think about like from a foundational perspective, it's like, well, what are you made of? And then how does that work? And so now but this resolves us down to the level of principles. And if you understand principles, then you make tremendously better decisions regardless of context, because principles are what exist regardless of context. Like these principles exist. There is no alternative. You know, you hear people talk about like, and Elon Musk gets credit for, you know, first principles thinking. Like he's like the sort of like the modern day guy that breaks things down into first principles. And that's Aristotle that was the first guy, right? Yeah. So Aristotle says, well, if we can mix this thing down to first principles, then number one, our understanding is much more deep, and then our decision, we are much more resilient in our ability to make these decisions and then apply the tools, right? That's basically what happened. I just stripped it all down, and I literally started and said, wait, what are you made of? How does it work? And then, okay, so in this context, what does that mean? And then everything starts to reveal itself. And then you see all these foundational elements of how we behave. And again, the deeper our understanding there, it's like, oh, now I understand why. Like something as simple as like, okay, why would you use an underhand medicine ball throw versus a rotating side chest pass? You know, it's like, oh, well, medicine balls increase power. We could just generally say that. But those are two distinct behaviors that have very different outcomes. And so if we understand the capabilities of the system, we understand what this system represents as far as its capacity for behavior, then I can make the decision between those two elements. And I can say, oh, this would be a better choice in this circumstance. This is a better choice in this circumstance. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. And I think when I asked you what you wanted to talk about, and you said the benefits of helical structure and influence of foundational structure on movement and performance. So that's a lot for somebody like me.
Seems like it.
Yeah, it does at first, but then when watching more of this, and then you know watching your YouTube video on the helical structure, and you just said, no, you went this deep. what are we made of? So, and I'll remind everybody, I just want to tell everybody, Bill's going to share his screen in a little while at any time when he wants because he has visuals that he can share to kind of see. This is the beauty of the video part of it. Bill, talk to me about, we're going to have to define helical structure and what you mean by the foundational structure as well. So I'll let you take it from there.
This is probably where we want to show some representations, because what I can do is I can sequentially build this structure so you can understand it, and then I have comparisons between what a helical structure represents and then something that it would be in opposition to it. And so by making the comparison, then you sort of reveal the reasoning behind why we are as we are. Yeah. And so we might want to just jump into that. Is that cool? We good? You see that?
Yeah, I could see that. Yep.
Awesome. Okay. So I have two representations here. So I have a sphere and then I have a cylinder. And so if we look at a sphere, what we have is we have this uniform pressurization within the sphere. So all the pressures against the external barrier of the sphere is equal in that circumstance, but we're not spheres. We try to approximate it because it's the most efficient shape in the universe, but we are cylinders. And so what we have to do is we have to say, okay, well, how does this pressurization change when we go from sphere to cylinder? And what we see, so if I squeeze in this cylinder, we develop what's called hoop tension, which means that the pressure outward into the cylinder is 2 times greater than it is on the two ends. And so that's how we're made. And so then we have to account for this pressurization. But if I make a comparison here, is like, so hoop tension is sort of like wearing a weight belt. And if you put on a weight belt really, really tight and like the powerlifting sort of style, it's like pressurize yourself into the belt kind of a thing. Yeah. It's like, that's the hoop tension. So that's your sensation of hoop tension. But this is also why weightlifting belts work really, really well, is because it helps manage this hoop tension and then it redistributes pressure up and down. And this is what makes you crazy stable. Okay.
Interesting.
So what we have then, the belt becomes a reinforcer of the cylindrical structure and allows us to manage pressure, because what we're made of is we're made of fluid and stuff. Okay. So the stuff is the container and the fluid's on the inside. So inside of us, it's like we're mostly water and air, but both of them are fluids, one compressible, one incompressible. So what this also helps us recognize is, like, if I am in the cylinder structure and I do have this hoop tension, it's like I'm more likely to explode into the belt than I am to explode the two ends off the top of the container. And so what I need is a reinforcing structure to help me manage this shape of this container, because it gives me opportunities by structure. And so now we can make this direct comparison about these reinforcing fibers, if you will, of the two containers. So on the right, we have what's called an orthogonal representation of reinforcing fibers, and on the left is the helix. So a helix is like a spring, if you just picture a spring in your head, and then we have a double, basically. If we look at this like the axial skeleton, so your torso from your neck to your hips. And so we have this reinforcing helical organization of our axial skeleton, and there are favorable elements to each of these two representations. One is very constrictive, and the other one is very adaptive. And so we're biased towards this helical structure. So if we were to compare this, then we look at the orthogonal. It's like, so it's reinforcing, so that's great. It helps us resist this explosion of hoop tension, but it also constrains us to shape change. So we move through shape change. You're a big bag of water that uses pressures to move the volumes around, and that's literally how all of our movement takes place. So we resolve the bulging problem associated with the hoop tension, but we lose our ability to change shape and we lose length. We also run into a problem if we would try to move. So this type of a structure, instead of having these nice smooth bends and twists and cool stuff that humans do, it creates kinks. So the representation that I would use, if you've ever crushed an aluminum can, think about that representation as what would happen if you try to bend an orthogonal structure. So it would create very high pressure areas that would literally just collapse in on itself. So this type of a structure really isn't a great representation of anything that has to move. So if you look at any animal in the universe, a lot of plants have the opposing, or this would not work in plants, because what would happen is if they're exposed to a stressor like wind or pressures of any kind, they would snap, right? Rather than bend freely with like again in the wind. If you try to twist this structure, the shear forces inside of the structure ramp up very, very quickly. So there's very destructive in this circumstance. And so this is the kinking that I was talking about. So
Yeah.
so if I try to bend this structure, this shows the collapse. So if I have this uneven pressure, I push down on one side, instead of getting this nice sort of storage and release of energy, I have a focal point of energy, and so it causes this structure to collapse. So not terribly useful as far as movement would be concerned. Again, a very stable structure. If I want to build a building, I'm using a
Yeah.
lot of orthogonal representations
Okay.
to hold the structure, because buildings may sway because they're really, really tall. They sort of build the sway into it, but it's within a very small range. And so if I would bend that building too far, it's just going to snap and collapse. Okay.
Bill, really, it's just a little
Uh-huh.
chicken egg question. Did we get this from building, from engineering, or did we get this from the body and say, oh, this is how we can build a structure?
It's sort of a little bit of both. It's just a recognition of context as to what would be ideal in a specific
Yeah.
circumstance.
Okay.
So it's kind of I'll make a point here when we get into the helical structure here, that it's sort of like it is an impossibility to determine whether it's the chicken or the egg scenario.
Okay. Yeah.
But let me jump ahead here. So when I have reinforcing fibers in a helical nature, I also solve the bulging problem. Okay, so I don't have to worry about the hoop tension conceptually. I've resolved that problem. The cool thing about this, though, is like in a situation where I twist this structure, so that's the torsion, I get this really cool energy storage element that the orthogonal structure would collapse under. So I get this distributed stress, which becomes incredibly useful because it's energy conserving. So if I twist this structure, the energy is stored along the helices, and this requires very little in the way of my energy production. This is something that our structure simply does. It's sort of like using like a rubber band example. I stretch the rubber band, there's energy stored. I release the rubber band, the energy is released. So this torsional structure provides that to us, but it also allows length changes. So I can actually change within a certain range. I can manipulate this structure to promote sort of like a shape change that would increase my length or increase my ability to widen. So it gives us tremendous opportunities for shape change. And then if I do bend this structure, there's no kinking. I get these nice smooth curves that again makes our movement incredibly elegant, where we get these sequential turns, which allows us to throw baseballs and swing golf clubs and run fast and jump high, because essentially what I have is a spring-like behavior in all circumstances. So if I bend a spring into a curve and I release that, the energy that's stored within that spring takes it right back to its original shape, which is exceptionally cool. And I didn't have to add energy to it to restore its shape. It does this automatically because I'm storing mechanical energy. It doesn't require me to produce chemical energy in that circumstance.
Yeah.
And so this is the comparison between the two. So you can see the kinking of the orthogonal, and then you see this nice smooth curvature. And so if you look at the expanded side of the cylinder, it's like that's the energy storage element of this helical structure. And if I release this, then it springs right back into its previous structure. So this is a helix. The cool thing about this is that while it appears to be curved lines, these are all straight lines.
It's wild.
And yeah, I know. It's one of the coolest things about humans. Biologically, curves are very unstable. And so so when we are constructed, we're constructed by triangulation. And so what you're looking at is a three-dimensional triangle, which is called a tetrahedron. And if I string these tetrahedrons together, I get this cool helical organization, because a triangle is very stable. You push on a triangle and all the energy is distributed within it. It's like if I add points of contact here, I create a very unstable structure. If I add curves, I have a very unstable structure. And so this gives us an incredible amount of stability, but also the ability to adapt and change shape. And this is ubiquitous. Like, you are at every level. And I'll give you some examples. At every level of your structure, this shows up. And so this is a DNA molecule. And so I drew some lines on it so you can actually see the helical structure. This is very cool because we don't think about stuff like this, but DNA has to store a tremendous amount of information in a very small space. So everything that you're made of is based on this DNA. So that's a lot of information. What the helical structure allows us to do is compress that information into a very small space. But we also have to recognize that DNA is always under tension. It literally has to be ripped apart. It has to change shape, right? And that's how we pass on information for our own construction. And so this structure, it makes it very resilient to all of the pressures and tensions that it's exposed to, literally at the cellular level. So from a foundational perspective, it's like at scale. This is like one of the smallest scales in your body. We're seeing this representation. If we move out and we start to look at the muscles themselves, so this is how the actin and myosin filaments inside of your muscle cells are actually organized, and you see this helical structure. Now, we know from a helix that we're constructed by triangulation, and so even though this looks like nice smooth curves, it is triangulated. So if you look at the myosin heads on the thick filament in the muscle cells, the myosin heads are actually organized on 60-degree angles within this helix. And so that's where we get to see the triangulation show up. And then there's a cross section here on the left side. If you look at letter B, that's a cross section of this combination of actin and myosin filaments. And what you're actually seeing is an icosahedral shape in cross section. What an icosahedron is a combination of tetrahedrons jammed together to create this shape. And so we maintain our triangulation, we maintain the stability of the system. Because you think about it, it's like if I had an unstable mechanism for muscle contraction, who knows what the result would be. It's like our measure of control would be so limited, and we would have very few options available to us. And so we see this at scale. And so this is a representation of scale. So on the left, I have a representation of, this is a collagen fiber. And so collagen fibers are organized in helices. When you look at how the muscle fibers are combined into fasciculi, they are in this twisting helical orientation. And then you get to the largest representation, which is the entire human. And you can see that we're also organized into helices. And so every level of scale, this shape shows up. And so if that shape is so important, then we need to understand it to the best of our capabilities, because again, it's the foundation of our representation of how we move. And if we can understand this, then we can apply our tools in a much more effective manner. So if we go back to our cylinders, this is just a comparison of how we can utilize this helical behavior to our advantage. So if you look at the sort of like the dead center of the picture here, we sort of have this representation of an average cylinder. And then the arrows represent pressures and tensions as to how this cylinder can manipulate itself. And we go to the comparison of the orthogonal again, it's like we don't have that available to us. So we can kind of scrap this sort of 90-degree angle orientation as a representation of humans. It's just a non-viable representation. And so now we move to the helices, and we say, well, okay, we know it's at every level of scale. We know that this is how we're going to use this. And then we can start to see biases in human structures, right? So if I could put two skeletons side by side, I can start to see like, oh, I have this sort of like tall, slender skeleton on one side, and I have this shorter, stocky skeleton on one side. And so if we were to compare 8 billion people all over the world 2 by 2, we will eventually find the most narrow of this helical structure and the most wide of this helical structure. And then we have this big spectrum that's in between. But what we find is, if you think about it, it's like, so we would theoretically have this comparative average guy, right, somewhere in the world that sort of fall like this midline between the two. He probably doesn't exist because he's incredibly average, and we don't know anything about him because he wouldn't be really good at anything. It's the biases of these structures that provide us the elements of performance that we'll see recognized, across the performance world. These biases gives you tremendous advantages, and then it will also limit your capabilities in some circumstances. By recognizing these structures, this is sort of the foundation of where we start to make better decisions from a training perspective or a rehab perspective, because what these structures do is they create probabilistic tendencies of behavior. We're not fully predictive. We're playing poker here instead of chess in this circumstance, right? But if we start to manage these probabilities and we can understand this, and we start making better decisions, our decisions get better. So instead of being 60% effective, if I can understand foundational structure and its influence, I start to skew the probabilities in my favor. So now I'm 87% more effective, and my decisions are just better.
Yeah. So are you basically saying too, like, okay, the shorter one, like the wider one might be better at, like, let's say squatting, like more of an axial loading position, and the other one, the thinner one might be better at maybe some speed stuff, et cetera. Like, is that what we're starting to bias it at?
Yeah, yes. So I actually have a great slide to actually show you that.
Cool.
You are totally on point. You totally get it.
But you know what it reminded me of? Like almost like the Olympic, going down to the Olympic Center in Colorado, and where they're doing blood testing, and they're like, wait, you know what, Bill? Sorry, you're not going to be good at this because your structure is a little bit
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, you get it. You totally get it. So this is my construction of the wide helical archetype, and so we can compare it to the wider, shorter cylinder as far as its behaviors are concerned. And I threw the helices onto the axial skeleton so you can kind of see this. And what we can actually use, we use their physical structure as a proxy measure for their behavioral tendencies. That's all this is, right? It doesn't mean that this structure can't run fast and jump high. It just means they might be predisposed to being better at certain things than other things, right? So this is first recognition. We say, well, let's identify how they're using their helical structure. And then we say, well, what are you going to be good at? What are you not going to be good at? And then we make the comparison. And so now we have this more linear organization, and we have a radial axis here that's closer to the long axis of the axial skeleton. And so this is going to predispose us to being better at certain things just by physical structure. Doesn't mean this person can't be strong, doesn't mean that they can't be fast. It just means that the way that they're going to produce an outcome is going to be different from somebody that has a different structure. So I could have two baseball pitchers that both throw 100 miles an hour, but they're going to have to do it in different ways because their structure precedes everything as far as what options are available. And so this is your point right here. So this is a force velocity curve. And so if we take our broader, wider helical structure, they tend to be much better at producing force. Now there's a trade-off in that their velocity is challenged. So you think about this type of guy. You mentioned like heavy squatting and things like that. It's like very, very heavy squat, relatively speaking, because he's a force producer very hard. The problem with that is that I can't demonstrate high velocity and high force at the same time. So you can see that they're opposite ends of the hyperbolic curve, which means that if I'm time constrained, this becomes a bit of a problem because I am a high force producer, but I need more time to do so, right? It's for lack of a better term, it's a slower representation, but allows tremendously high forces. So think about the biggest guys you can think of, like super heavyweight powerlifters, very, very strong, very high force producers. But if I was going to put them in a 100-meter dash against Usain Bolt, I would hazard to guess that Usain's probably going to win, right? Just as a differential. If I go to the other end of the curve, so this would be where we would see our narrow helical structure, much better at velocity. They don't push into the ground as hard over the same duration, and so they're more representative of activities that produce velocity. So, and again, it's not that wider people can't be faster. It's not that narrower people can't be more forceful. What we're doing is we're showing the extremes for understanding as to tendencies of behavior, right? And you have a foundational structure that mom and dad gave you, right? And so what we want to do is we want to say, what is your tendency? And then we can say, I need to produce this specific outcome, regardless of archetype. But what this allows us to do is allows us to skew our programming to be much more coherent, to appreciate their foundational structures and what they contribute to that performance-related outcome. And so now I can manipulate variables within the program and say, okay, I got this really high force producer, but I got a time constraint. So, I'm going to throw a pitch. I'm going to throw a pitch in less than 2 seconds. That's time constrained. But if I need 5 seconds to produce my maximum force, it's like, okay, I need to skew programming towards the rate of force development for this guy because he doesn't have enough time to demonstrate his force. Whereas now I skew this to the other end of the spectrum and I say, oh, I got a guy that's velocity based, but he needs a space to do this in, right? If I increase his force production too high, I've squeezed him so tight that he can push down into the ground, but I took away the space that he needs because the narrower construction gives me more turning capability, which produces a bigger window of time because I'm a lower force producer. But for me to create like an outcome like a baseball pitch, so we talk about impulse in that circumstance. So what you're actually applying to a baseball is an impulse, and so that has a time constraint and the amount of force. So my narrower guy is a lower force producer, but if I can expand the amount of time that he has to produce that force, I can produce the same impulse into the ball. And so this is how we get equivalence of performance-related outcome with different structures. So both of these guys can throw a baseball 100 miles an hour. The one guy's going to do it with a higher force in a shorter period of time, but I need the expanded time window for the narrow guy to produce the equivalent impulse because his total force production would be relatively lower by tendency.
Love it. We just had this discussion. I think it's very a similar idea. Greg Rose was talking about when you're with somebody to find that superpower. Okay, you find their superpower and you work on that superpower because too many times we have like this discrepancy and then we say, well, we have to build this one up. That's what it seems like. So wait a minute, you're what you're really doing is you're building this up, but now this one's coming down. You should have worked on the superpower because you worked on the wrong thing. That's similar to what I feel like what I've just gotten from you.
Well, yeah, and you're also touching on the concept of a trade-off because you will give up something to gain something else because you have a finite resource pool to draw from. Yeah. Right? I can increase force production in this narrower helical structure, but at what cost? So let's go back to the pitching example as a representation. So if I increase this force production, so to increase the force production for anyone, I have to be able to squeeze the system harder to create more pressure. So it's the pressure that ultimately results in our ability to produce force. So I take a lower pressure helical structure and I teach it to squeeze. So this would be your force producing activities like strength training. If I squeeze the system too hard, so I increase its force production. So my gym numbers go up, my trap bar deadlift goes up. But to do so, I had to squeeze this structure so hard that I take away the time that he was using to produce the impulse. Now I've shortened that. And so now I have this element of force that I have, but I shorten the time window that he has to produce it in. I take away some of that impulse, and now I've reduced his throwing velocity by making him too strong. And so people always say, well, how strong is strong enough? How strong is strong enough is determined by the key performance indicators that are utilized to produce the outcome. So if I take away your space to produce force, I am also taking away your impulse. And so this is why we have to be very, very careful. This is why we track key performance indicators over time, because it's not just about increasing all performance measures. It's saying, okay, if I increase this one, what am I sacrificing? That's what we have to be careful of. And that's why we want to write more coherent programs. And that's why foundational structure becomes a useful influence if we can understand it.
Yeah.
Now,
It
go
also
ahead.
kind of, okay, sorry. You
No,
wanna-
no, no, no. Go ahead. Go.
Okay.
You go.
It kind of reminded me a little bit of the Ben Johnson, Carl Lewis argument, right?
Yes.
One
Perfect
would never
example.
do, right? So
Yeah.
one would work out, the other one worked out like crazy, and then everybody's like, "Well, Ben Johnson did it this way," and then, "Oh, Carl Lewis did it this way." Like, so
Right.
you can't blindly follow just what they're doing.
Correct, and we can get into that. And for the kids at home, Ben Johnson and Carl Lewis were amazing sprinters back before you were born. So hopefully they still remember those people. But you put them side by side and you see the influences of structure. So both of them were incredible sprinters at the finish line, but the way that they got there was truly different. And there's little things that you hear about Carl Lewis and Ben Johnson as far as like how their physical preparation went. And Carl Lewis was not one to rely on heavy strength training. Ben Johnson, because of his structure, benefited from the heavy strength training. So from an accelerative standpoint, Carl Lewis wasn't the best accelerator. Ben Johnson, what he had like at one point, he had like the world's fastest start, I believe.
Yeah.
Right. But Carl Lewis was like in the last 60 meters, like Carl Lewis was, that's where he would win his races. Ben Johnson would be this amazing accelerator and then hold on to the end. So they could literally run the equivalent time, right? But they're going to produce this in different ways. And so obviously we want to skew training appropriately, because if we would compress Carl Lewis, we take away his top speed. We might make him a little bit better in the acceleration, but if I take away the way that he wins a race, it's like, okay, then that's my fault for not recognizing the changes in behavior. So now we're going to superimpose another element of structure on this. And so this looks at the covariations in the thorax and the pelvis. And what this means is, so if we take our cylinder behavior, we can narrow and expand the diameters of the cylinders, so we can kind of skew them. And so these are the representative shapes that we'll typically see. And this is confirmed by Nicole Torres Tamayo. She looked at a couple populations in South Africa and Europe, and just measuring. I had seen these and I didn't have any evidence for it. And then thankfully she did this study. And so it reinforces this. And then I've actually communicated with her a little bit because same thought, two different people. It's like, oh, what did you find? What did you find? Kind of thing. And her next avenue is, like she said, she wanted to kind of get into performance and look at these things. There is a study that's on distance runners that shows one of the matches here that we'll talk about. But if I was to give you a representation of each one of these structures, so on the, and I've nicknamed them just to make life simple, right? Okay. So like a pillar, a piston, a pylon, and a funnel. And I do know, I'm not stupid. I know that funnel starts with an F, but I wanted a P word because the other ones were P words, right? So just for consistency. Why people might think I'm stupid. So, but if we look at it, we look at a pillar. This is a very, very high pressure organization of a thorax and a pelvis. And so this would be our representation of, say, a super heavyweight powerlifter. So very, very high force, but not terribly efficient as far as movement is concerned because of the high pressure system. If we look at the piston, we have this longer representation of the axial skeleton. It's a little bit lower pressure system, and it doesn't have any differential between the top and the bottom, so it becomes very, very efficient. So we look at your innards, right? Your guts. The guts have to move as you move, and so we want this really efficient kind of pistony thing. So this would be skewed towards a distance runner. And again, this is supported in the literature when they looked at the axial structure of distance runners. We go to the pylon configuration. So this is where we take the diameter of the cylinder and we squish it at the top and we leave it expanded at the bottom. And this is my accountant. And I make that joke that this is my accountant because he doesn't have a whole lot of athleticism. What this does is it creates a pressurization at the top that pushes you down into the ground. And so it's very hard. It's much harder to leave the ground. It's much harder to be fast because literally just the physics of this organization makes it more difficult. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't improve athletes that have this structure. It just means we need to understand this structure so that the elements that we do choose to implement are supportive of what we're trying to produce as an outcome. If we go all the way to the end and we look at the funnel shape, we have the opposite of the pylon. So these are the people that leave the ground very easily because the pressure differentials actually skew our behavior to move us upward. And so if you were to look at, say, vertical jumping, for instance, and we'll use Michael Jordan as an example of a funnel, right? So average air time in the vertical jump is about half of a second. Michael Jordan's was skewed to above 0.9, so he was almost twice as long in the air compared to the average. So there's tremendous athletic advantages here, which is why we see this sort of ubiquitously in like the faster athletes. So look at a wide receiver versus an offensive lineman. It's like the offensive lineman can be fast for his his structure and task, but if we really wanted to make the comparison, we say, well, who's going to be the fastest guy, and we put those two guys side by side, you can start to see that, oh, this structure is skewed in a certain way because it gives them more airtime per stride. And so Usain Bolt is another example. When you look at the number of steps on average, I believe that the elite sprinters take 43 steps in the 100 meters. And I think that when he set his world record, he was like I can't remember the exact number. It's like 39 or 41. I can't remember exactly, but he took fewer steps because he was actually in the air for a longer period of time for each step. And so this provides us with this, again, foundational representations of exercise selection that would be more optimal depending on the desired outcome. And then I want to throw in these muscles here because these are the big ones that everybody tends to talk about when we're in the weight room as far as constructing programming. These are the squeezers. And so this is what we have to be careful of, is that if we have this helical structure, I can manipulate my ability to move pressures up and down, forward and back, side to side, which gives me turning capabilities, pressure into the ground, or the ability to leave the ground. And so we have to be very careful as to our exercise selection and how we would apply these things. So that's my rundown of basic foundational structure as to how this stuff is going to work and why it's an influence that has to be taken into consideration when we're writing our programs.
Bill, how are we finding out about, and part of me was wondering too, when you were showing those things, was this idea, because you've seen books on train this person because they're a mesomorph or ectomorph. Is it really like, are we, when you say that, is that not right? Or is it because you really need to look at the structure underneath the configuration? And how do we find configuration?
Yeah. So those somatotypes are representations of what we just looked at.
Okay.
Right. But they're leaving some of the elements of the structure out. It's like so we can visually recognize, like you put a group of athletes in the room and you could somatotype them, right? But then there are other nuances of structure that also provide benefits or detriments to performance that we can also take into consideration. And again, it just helps the more we understand the influences of structure, the better our exercise selection becomes.
So how, like with just the configurations, besides just looking at them, you're probably pretty good at it at this point now, but like, how do we really know those little differences? I mean, can you really tell from the naked eye, or are there some things that we might miss on the naked eye? So I wanted to, how do you figure it out?
You can. And so all of this can be determined through observation and performance. It just takes more time, because I have to run more experiments, right? I can get this visual representation, and then I have to do stuff, right? So I take somebody into the gym and I execute. So here you go. Let's take the 4 configurations and let's put them all on the same program. Do you think the outcomes are going to be the same? No. So this is one of the reasons why when you do put a whole group of people on the same program, this is why some people are successful, some people are moderately successful, some people are just skewed and don't make the progress, right? Because again, we created a generalized program that didn't take structure into consideration. And so this, again, it's just one of the reasons why we see different outcomes with the same program.
Do we also probably have to be careful now? Let's say, you come in and I'm like, oh, hey, Bill, nice to meet you. Cool. We're going to work with me. I'm going to do a couple assessments with you. If I do an overhead squat, let's say, and I'm not taking that configuration into consideration, I might be missing out on something there too. Am I right?
That is correct. That is correct. So an overhead squat is a projection activity, which means that it's going to try to push you forward very, very quickly. Okay. If I take that activity, and the reason that it pushes you forward is because you're creating a compression in the posterior upper thorax in that circumstance. So it's basically shoving you forward. But if I have a structure that would be more grounded, so let's take a wide ISA, high pressure, and then superimpose the pylon configurator on top of them. So high pressure and downforce. So what's going to happen is I'm going to try to push this person forward, and accidentally, because they have to go forward, but they're a high force producer into the ground. They're pushing the ground. I'm not going to gain the benefit of that activity, because all that's going to happen is I'm going to squeeze the top of that pylon to a much greater degree, and it will magnify the downforce. So if I wanted to make somebody, say, quicker on their feet, faster, or get them to jump higher, they don't have the same projection capabilities. A better choice in this circumstance, think about this, it's like I got somebody that's biased pushing into the ground, so I want to make them sort of lighter on their feet, right? And so if I did a reverse band box squat, what that does is it gives them the assist against their natural dynamics, and so it unweights them and allows them to. So you have internal mass that you're actually moving when you're changing the height of your center of gravity, right? And so if I have to push up more quickly and every bias that I have is going downward, I need an unweighting strategy to teach me how to improve my rate of force development in that circumstance. So I drop out the overhead squat and I go, oh, you're going to be my reverse band box squatter, because I know that it's going to solve the problem based on your physical structure, and it's going to give me the opportunity to increase that rate of force development. So instead of skewing you towards the force end of the strength curve, I can start to move you towards the velocity end, and therefore I've provided a solution.
Okay. Can you just tell people what the reverse band, where would that go?
So you hook the bands to the bar, and then you secure them overhead at the top of the rack, so that when they sit down on the box, the band is actually stretching. And so then you take advantage of the elastic force that's going to be applied to the bar, which allows you to increase the acceleration against the top down gradient that is created by physical structure or load, right? So we have to be very careful. We have to be very careful how we load people, because again, if somebody, like, again, the pylon configuration is sort of like the easiest one because they have more stuff against them by a long shot. We just have to be careful how we load these people, because if we're trying to increase like squat strength, and I have a bias, like I'll make progress, but ultimately, am I taking away something that I would need from a performance related outcome? You know, you got somebody that's a really good rebounder, they're a good positioner, so they need quick feet, right? If I jam them into the ground with load, it makes it more difficult for them to actually reposition their feet in that circumstance.
Yeah, interesting. Can you give us, again, go back to the case study idea? Just
actually, I have a real life one that we could use.
Cool.
And it relies on a baseball pitcher. So I worked with a kid for years when he was in high school, a tall kid, but a little pylon-y kind of a guy. So a smaller diameter at the top, wider diameter at the bottom. And we progressively improved his throwing performance to where he was throwing 92 miles an hour. He gets a scholarship. He gets to go to a very, very good school in this circumstance. And so when he left to go to school, his trap bar deadlift was 425. Okay. And this school happens to emphasize the weight room quite a bit, regardless of position. And so he contacts me and he says, hey, my velo's dropping off. I'm starting to get elbow pain. Can I come in and see you? So he comes in and we're having a discussion. And it's like, well, how's it going with training and stuff like that? He goes, oh, it's amazing. He goes, my trap bar deadlift is now 625. And I was like, great, but okay, what is the consequence of that? So we did a series of rotational tests. We looked at shoulder excursion. We looked at his elbow shape and movement there. And based on previous measures, we saw a drop off of his ability to turn his axial skeleton. We lost shoulder range of motion, and he couldn't bend his elbow. Okay, couldn't bend his elbow normally under that circumstance, right? And granted, there's a lot of influences here. a lot of influences, right?
Mhm.
It could just be the way that he has been throwing, or whether they're appreciating his capabilities. Like there's a difference between a starting pitcher and a closer as far as how they produce their force, and then the amount of effort that's in play. So that skews it as well. But here's what we do understand. We do understand that we had a structure that was biased towards the ground. They squeezed in more at the top. So that's the loss of shoulder motion. That's the loss of the axial turn, right? And then the amount of pressure that you're trying to produce in certain circumstances, so like think about heavy pressing, things like that. Like that's a pressurization that goes from the center of your body out to the arm, right? And so if I increase my capacity to pressurize like that, but I take away the excursion that I needed to produce that velocity. So I shorten the time window. It's like I can't even use the force that I now am capable of because I don't have enough time to demonstrate it, because the range of motion excursion showed us that we lost the key performance indicator that we needed to maintain for one, health, and number two, performance.
Interesting. So they kind of,
Like I said, it's the trade-off. It's like everything that you do has the intended consequence, and then there are secondary consequences associated with that. So it's not just one thing. You say, well, my intention is to increase their force. Okay, what are you going to give up to do that? And up to a threshold, like I want an athlete to produce as much force as they possibly need to perform. But there's going to be a threshold where the give and take starts to show up, and that's what we have to monitor over time. And that's why we need data points. So we collect data, right? We don't just look at the weight room numbers. We have to say, okay, but what is this doing to the rest of the system, and then how that system behaves. If I start to give up something, that could be a good thing because it increases my force production in a context, right? If I don't need like a full excursion of a joint to perform, but I do need high force, great, keep doing that. But if I start to lose something that's important, now we have health issues, and then we have performance issues.
so you're saying basically two. Okay. What range of motion does he have now? External range of motion, external range in shoulder, external
Correct.
rotation in the shoulder. We better
Yes,
keep
sir.
it there with everything else that we're doing, because this is what he is doing now. We don't want that trade-off to kind of go up the chain, and then now we're decreasing that, if that's important. That's what you're talking about, data points, right?
Yeah. Again, we have to decide what's important, and again, you do that by collecting data. And so you monitor, because you don't know what the outcome is going to be. You have no idea what the outcome. This is like playing pin the tail on a donkey with a moving donkey. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like so, and that's why this is not an easy job, because we have to take more and more things into consideration to make better and better decisions. But if we start to recognize these things, especially the foundational structural elements and how they influence this, we can say, okay, you're going to have a tendency to do this, and so I need to play probabilities here and say, okay, is this the best decision under the circumstance?
Bill, can you go over? I didn't tell you I was going to do this either, but I saw your dirty words, and I think it's really important to understand the dirty words, because we do get wrapped up in these things. Like I know, like functional training or core, or can you just go tell people what some of the dirty neutral, right? Some of these things, we get stuck and we have a picture in our head of what those are, and then we think everybody should have them. So can you talk about that? Because I thought that was pretty interesting. And you didn't, at the time, you weren't going over all the dirty words. You just went over ones. I want to know more about it.
Yeah. So dirty words. So jargon. It's like I talked. My brother's in like wealth management, right? And so they have terms that they use, because what jargon is shorthand. It allows us to use a word that encompasses a lot of meaning. That's useful jargon, and then there's jargon that is not useful because of the way that it is used. And so in every industry there is useful jargon, and then there's kind of meaningless jargon, and there's a lot of words that get used but don't provide us a sufficient understanding. And so that's kind of why I make a dirty words list of like things like neutral spine. It's like, how the heck do you ever know that you've got a neutral spine? It's like this vague notion of like some ideal representation, which is impossible, because we know from the literature that we can never produce the same thing twice, right? And so using that conceptually, it tends to not be too valuable, right? What we want to be able to do is we can say, I have options available to me that allow me to move through these different phases of movement, and that's what I'm looking for. It's the access. It's not creating a representative ideal. It's having sufficient options that the ideal lies somewhere in that space, but the space isn't too big, right? Because this is like signal and noise type of discussions. Like signal would be some like imaginary perfect optimal that doesn't exist, and then you're plus or minus that, and that's what gives you access and adaptability. If my adaptability is too wide but I can't access signal, that's instability and you're all over the place, right? And so we just have to be careful with some of the terms that we use. The word functional is a mechanical term, that's machine terminology. We are not machines. We are adaptive organisms, and therefore it should not be applied. We behave. We don't function, right? And again, this kind of skews us into scenarios of like lever systems and things like that. We don't use levers. We are big balls of water that shift and change pressures to change our shapes as we move through space. If we were levers, the degree of effort that we would have to use would be off the charts. The amount of load that we absorb into isolated structure would be destructive. That's why you see, you ever see those, like they use Euclidean geometry to calculate forces in the body, like triangulations and
Yeah. Okay.
and rectangles and stuff like that. And they say, oh, this produces a force at the L5S1 segment. By the way, this force actually exceeds the load tolerance of the structure, but for some reason, it doesn't destroy us, right? It's like, I think Grakovetsky in the Spinal Engine talks about this in a couple of different places where he actually demonstrates like this force exceeds the capacity by 3 times the load of the lumbar spine, but yet the lumbar spine doesn't explode under these heavy lifts. And the reason is because we have this helical structure that distributes these loads throughout the entire system. And so again, tremendous advantage of structure, and that's how it works. And so if that doesn't work, like the calculation of forces, it's like we have to be doing it in a different way. And so then if we understand how that works, then again, it influences our decision-making capabilities.
Are those dirty words within peer-to-peer? Because, for example, core or neutral, I normally just say find your middle if I'm looking for those two with the spine.
Sure.
How are you speaking to the client, the patient, the athlete who might not, we want to keep it as simple as possible?
Well, there's nothing wrong with speaking a language for understanding, but if you ask 100 Gen Pop clients what core means,
Yeah, true.
they don't know. They don't know. They just know they just know it feels like it's here,
Yeah.
right? But you have to appreciate it's like what else is attached that is influencing the shape and position of the body in a specific circumstance. So there's nothing that is isolative. If it was isolative, it would be very difficult to manage, right? So again, it's just recognizing the fact that by utilizing this language, it might help you with communication in some level, but then it creates interference in other levels because it just becomes nebulous and confusing because it's too generalized. It doesn't give us enough information, right? And again, it's like looking at something in isolation. It's like we want to take the whole system into consideration, and that's where we fall back on. Oh, this is how the structural elements actually work together.
Great. So I want to remind everybody before I'm going to have you do a little bit of an elevator pitch for UHP
Sure.
Network, only because I will tell everybody first. It's guys. There's a lot of free information on here. Just sign up and then they approve you. And then there's a lot of articles and a couple of courses that I looked over that really kind of give you a better understanding of this stuff. But I'll let Bill tell you more about the UHP network, UHP.network. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, it's UHP.network to access the website. We've got a free side, and then we've got the stuff that's behind a paywall for the people that really want to invest into this stuff in much greater depth. But there's 2 free courses, and it's organized in a way to promote understanding. Like you kind of mentioned it, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, now it's sequential. That makes a lot more sense. Yeah. And that's why we did this, because there are a lot of things to take into consideration, and there is a little bit of a learning curve, because again, language changes. We're trying to keep everything coherent with what we talk about, but it is designed to lead you towards this greater understanding. It was like what of all these options are, and this is where I live there. Like everything that I do is there now, because I was kind of spread all over the place, and as this becomes more and more refined, and then taking advantage of the inputs of other people. So one of the reasons why this is such a great thing is like we have other professionals that they can now communicate back and forth, and they're helping each other, and then we have these broad aspects of Q and like all these categories of Q&A that are on there, that are categorized for people to be able to access very specific elements, and to see all these Q&As, all of our Zoom communications and calls. I used to do coffee calls. I did 250 some free coffee calls. They're on there now. Like all of them are on there, so you can actually go back and you can actually see the evolution of process, which is also kind of cool. But this is the place, and there are folks that are claiming that they know this stuff, and it's like there is only one place, and that is here at the UHP Network, because this is the foundation of everything that I do, and so it is the place. And if you're interested, then by all means come join us. If you don't care, that's cool too. You're not hurting anybody's feelings here. This is just an opportunity to expand your perspective that might be helpful for you.
Very cool. Yeah. Again, guys, just try it out. It's free. There's a lot of free stuff on there, and you can check it out and see if it's for you. So, Bill, thanks for coming on and spending a little extra time and doing this. This is awesome.
Yeah, I had a great time. Thank you for asking me, because it's been a long time.
Absolutely.